The foreign policy of the presidential candidates, both President Trump and the presidential nominee Joe Biden, they have a lot of commonalities as far as India is concerned, as well as a lot of differences, and how this will impact, we'll wait and see. The constants are based on the broad bilateral consensus in the United States between the two major political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. There is a constant, there is a consensus that of looking at India as a strategic partner, keeping in view what they call as the dance of democracies, that two democracies can always create a partnership and stay together. There is also consensus of India being a major strategic partner vis-a-vis China and a force to reckon with in the Indo-Pacific. So this is another factor which is very common, both whether it is President Trump or Vice President Joe Biden, because it was in the tenure of former President Barack Obama where Mr. Joe Biden was a vice president. During that time, the Asia-Pacific rebalancing was undertaken, and India was one of the factors which was highlighted during that period as well. Now, as far as the Indian economy is concerned, as we know, India is one of the largest consumer markets in the world. This is an attractive feature, whether you take all consumer companies such as Amazon, Walmart, even information consumer companies, Google, Microsoft, they have got large presence as far as India is concerned, and that presence and sustenance is likely to be continued by both the two presidents, or the president and the president nominee. India is a defense partner. Again, there is no two opinions in the candidates that India is a major defense partner, and they are likely to continue to hold India as a major defense partner in the years to come. Then you have a look at the defense sales. Now, if you see the US defense sales in the last few years, almost touching 6 to 7 billion US dollars, and President Trump is very keen as far as defense sales are concerned, because his America First policy involves that increase in the defense sales are inevitable. So keeping that in view, even Mr. Joe Biden has been pushing for the expansion of the defense sales, and that is where I think there is a congruence of that. If you look at Afghanistan, again, India is very clear that whether it is Biden or Trump, both are going to pull out from Afghanistan, and India has to be prepared for whatever the fallout of that will be. Now let us look at what are the differences and how this impacts India per se. So looking at the differences, as far as the policy predictability is concerned, I think it is very well established that President Trump predictability of policy is very low, and it has taken even his own staff by surprise at times. But Mr. Joe Biden is expected to follow a very stable and considerably opinion and advice-based policy. So I think he'll be positive for India. The next aspect is multilateralism versus unilateralism. Again, we find that President Trump unilateral and President Biden is going to follow the multilateral policies. In these circumstances, I think again Mr. Biden will be favored as far as India is concerned, because India is also looking for a multilateralist relationship across the world. Now, as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, he is highly competitive towards the partners. Now, mark the words I am saying is partners and not towards adversaries. So, India being a partner, but even with India, he adopts a very highly competitive policy. Even for small things, as we know, such as the Harley-Davidson motorcycles. He insisted that India reduce the duties on the Harley-Davidson motorcycles, which possibly a president, some other person would have not really kept that much in mind. But nevertheless, this is what his policy is, and we expect that Mr. Joe Biden will be more conciliatory as far as the economic and trade relations are concerned. Again, economy, America first is Mr. Trump's policy. It has served him well because the American economy definitely has shown a good progress during his tenure there. Nevertheless, from the global point of view, it has been a very not a very good choice, and it is hoped that Vice President nominee or the President nominee Biden will follow a balanced economic policy, and that will be good for him. As far as China is concerned, Mr. Biden is going to follow, it is believed, a less aggressive policy than Mr. Trump. Now, whether it will be good or bad for India, I actually, frankly, I will not be able to assess that. It's a very situation is not clear whether, but that will depend on how we see the differentials emerging. Then Russia, as you know, Russia is a major strategic partner of India, and Mr. Trump was soft towards Russia, which was, I think, as far as India is concerned, is not a bad policy at all, and to that extent, India was happy with Mr. Trump. Another country which is of importance to both India and the United States, Iran. Mr. Trump has adopted a very hardline stance, whereas Mr. Biden, who is likely to adopt a much softer stance, which will be, I think, Mr. Biden will be the positive as far as India is concerned. Israel, Mr. Trump, as we know, is a very strong supporter. India is a major strong strategic partner of Israel, and Mr. Biden may not be as strong a supporter of Israel as Mr. Trump. So I think from that point of view, Mr. Trump may be preferred in India. In West Asian sphere, Mr. Trump has been largely transactional, whereas Mr. Biden is likely to be more balanced. So I think he should be preferred as far as India is concerned. Now, Quad cooperation, as we discussed, there is bilateral consensus in the United States for Quad, so both are likely to continue. But Mr. Biden is expected to balance Quad a bit. It will not be seen purely as a economic or a military platform, but there will be attempts to sort of balance the two, and that is where I think India may prefer, in this case, Mr. Biden as well. As far as the West Asia is concerned, again, balanced policies which are going to be followed by Mr. Biden, whereas Mr. Trump will follow the transactional as we discussed earlier. Now let's come on to the interesting factor of Euro-Atlantic relations, that is United States and Europe relations. Mr. Trump has been very, very negative as far as the Euro-Atlantic relations are concerned. He has been castigating his allies and partners, whereas Mr. Biden is likely to be more conciliatory. And from the Indian point of view purely, I think Mr. Trump may be better because of the, I'm talking very narrowly from the Indian point of view, that this relationship, because Europe then turned towards India. The more US turns away from Europe, the more Europe will turn towards India. But this is purely a transactional aspect. On the whole, a balanced relationship will continue to be better. Now let us look at the other factors, such as the political support in India. Mr. Trump is strongly supporting the BJP, and BJP will continue to be in power for the next 4 years. So during the next tenure also, the strong support will be there, and the political support by BJP will definitely prefer Mr. Trump. As far as the human rights and Kashmir is concerned, I think that's where the present government will definitely prefer Mr. Trump, because he is asking no questions on Kashmir and the human rights issue, whereas Mr. Biden is going to be very strong on the activities that are happening in Kashmir, including the Citizenship Act, etc., etc. So he will going to come down very strongly on that. If you look at the people-to-people relations, again Mr. Trump is US-centric, so India may prefer Mr. Biden. If you look at environment and technology, India may prefer Mr. Biden rather than Mr. Trump. So if we summarize, we find from the Indian perspective, India may be better off in many respects in a Biden presidency than Mr. Trump. But as far as the government is concerned, they have very clearly said, we will manage our relations. And in fact, even yesterday, I think, the United States Deputy Secretary of State, Mr. Biden, he said that it doesn't matter who wins the presidential elections, relations with India will be stable and strong. So that is where I will end my part of the presentation.